This now from Capitol Hill, Republican Senator Senator Tom Coburn. Good morning, Senator. A lot to get to you with, but first let's ask for your thoughts on Snowden receiving temporary refugee status and as it pertains especially to U.S.-Russia relations.
Well, I think it probably hurt the relationship. He's undoubtedly, in my mind, a traitor to our country, and probably most of what he knows the Russians already know. So the assessment and the damage to our country's security, it's a gold mine for them.
It certainly is at this point. We'll be following this to get more information in. Let's now turn to the Republican bid to defund Obamacare. I want to read a pretty harsh column by Eric Erickson about you, sir. I'm not going to read the title even, but it says, Coburn is willing to wage a holy war against wasteful pork barrel spending. But on Obamacare these days and other issues outside of government pork, Coburn toes the leadership line, held up as the reasonable conservative by leadership. On Mike Lee's defund strategy, Senator Coburn says it's impossible. I wish Tom Coburn would join the fight with Mike Lee, Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, and Marco Rubio. Having spent so much time with Senate Republican leaders peddling can't instead of try, I give up hope he can change in the twilight of his Senate career. Your response, sir, to that?
Oh, you can't respond to the bloggers. I mean, one period in a 6-month, I'm a hero, and the next time I'm not. And the fact is unless you agree with them 100% of the time, all the time, you don't pass muster. So, that's a blogger on Red State that I obviously can't please. I'm not sure how to best characterize. Nobody's ever put me in anybody's camp other than my own. And so what we're trying to do, nobody disagrees with the goal, they just disagree with the tactics.
But there certainly is criticism that your colleagues can't seem to find unity on issues.
Mika, that's not true. I mean, you have 11 Republican senators out of 46. That means 35 don't agree with the strategy. So the press loves to say there's a division. Sure, there's 11 senators with some outside groups behind them to try to promote a strategy that, in my 65 years of life, think is a pregnant strategy that will deliver nothing other than pain and not be successful. And so, it's not that their motivations aren't good. Their motivations are right. I'd love to gut Obamacare because it's going to be terrible for the country in the long run. And it's going to be terrible for patients and doctors. It's going to be terrible for costs. But the fact is if you have a strategy, what you ought to do is build internally a support for that strategy and come to an agreement so that you have all the power of the Republicans working it, rather than have a small group of Republicans who then generate, through outside groups, pressure on other Republicans. My attitude, and Joe knows this, Mike Barnacle knows this, you start pushing me, all you do is get me to push back harder.
Oh, boy.
And so, I'm kind of like Mike. Mike said he'd been a father of a minor child for 50 years. I've been a minor child for 50 years. I'm just now getting mature. And the fact is I know what I believe, and I know why I believe it, and no outside group's going to push me around.
Well, I certainly wouldn't see 65 as the twilight of your career. Steve Ratner.
Well, I think they meant in the Senate, because I'm a short timer in the Senate.
I hope 65 isn't the twilight of a career, or else a number of us are in trouble.
We're out of here.
So, Senator, turning to the broader budget issue that's going on, as you know, yesterday the House pulled the HUD and Transportation Appropriations Bill because they didn't have the votes to pass it. And so the whole budget situation seems to be even more unraveled, if that's possible, than what it's been. You have the Senate going one way, you've got the House trying to go another way, but not even be able to keep all their people together. And of course, you've got recesses coming, very few legislative days left till October 1. How does this all play out in terms of getting us to the beginning of the next fiscal year with a government that's still functioning?
Well, I think when you as you categorize all of what you just said, the one thing that's lacking, I think, in Congress and in the White House is leadership. well, how did we get there? How is it Harry Reid never put bills on the floor until 2 weeks ago for appropriation? How is it that we don't have an agreement which 43 senators on the other side voted for, the ACA levels as the budget levels? How is it that we don't have that agreement? Are we spending too little money as a federal government? The contention by the president would be yes, but where's the leadership to solve those problems? Where's the meetings? The fact is we don't have any leadership. And so I think what will happen is you'll see at breakneck speed coming up to September 30th, all sorts of maneuvering, and at the end of September 30th, you'll see a CR that will continue the government, which is terrible. We're not doing our jobs if that's what we're doing. We're certainly not giving the flexibility and the planning capability to the agencies. But I think that's what you're going to see.
Hey, Senator, Mika introduced this segment by reading a part of Eric Erickson's piece about you on Red State. And it raises the question in my mind, have we reached a point in your business, the business of politics, where a certain percentage of senators and members of Congress pay more attention now to bloggers and tweeters than they do to the voters and to the larger interests of the country?
Well, Mike, that may be the case. I think the number one thing they don't pay attention to is the U.S. Constitution and the enumerated powers that are listed in there in the 10th Amendment. That's what they're not paying attention to. What I would tell you, once we start abandoning, matter of fact, I'm going to introduce the Enumerated Powers Act today. It has 35 co-sponsors, but there's not one Democrat on there. And all it says is when you're going to pass a bill, justify by relating to the Constitution where you get the power to do that. Because we wouldn't be $17 trillion in debt if we actually followed the Constitution. What our founders said is a very limited government. We wouldn't be there. So Mike, we are a mess. I call it the kindergarten in Washington because we really lack leadership, and what we have is selfish desires for political power rather than thoughtful consideration about what's in the best long-term interest of our country as a whole, and what are we putting at risk when we don't have the leadership that redirects us to think long-term and also think in terms of a limited government. I think our kids are at great risk right now.
I agree.
Senator Tom Coburn, thank you very much. Good to see you.
Good to see you all.
Coming up, his international bestseller